Non, je n'ai pas peur, même pas du docteur ni de Frankenstein qui à Shanghai. Non, je n'ai pas de raison de me faire du mouron, de me cacher comme une huître et d'éviter la...
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spark My Muse. I'm your host, Lisa Colon-DeLay, and you're listening to Soul School, Lesson 308, Unlearning the 5 Love Languages and Other Fables. Most of us are familiar with the book called The 5 Love Languages. This book has sold over 20 million copies since the first edition came out in 1992. And I've always wondered, was this some sort of pop psychology that came out, like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and that series of books designed to help relationships, keep people married, and give people something to talk about? Was it ever empirically proven that there are 5 love languages? The author of the 5 love languages is Gary Chapman. He's now 86 years old. And the promise of his book and the other books that followed out of the same love languages mold was that if we got to know our own ways of appreciating love and our partner's ways of appreciating love, we could have higher relationship satisfaction and longer lasting relationships. So the 5 love languages, if you can't remember what they are, according to Chapman: acts of service, quality time, physical touch, words of affirmation, and receiving gifts. And it turns out these aren't love languages at all. We love metaphor, we love categories, and most of us like all of these to some degree or another. And there's many more languages, if you will, that also make us feel connected. But the 5 love languages, it makes a little bit of a category mistake of false choices. And I was trying to think about how do I explain this. So say I put up the category of tree, and then underneath that category I put color, shape, size, smell, and the way it looks in context. And then I asked you to pick out what are your favorite things about the tree. Now you might check off color and smell. But in a way, those are false choices because probably all sorts of things about the tree make it something you would like. Just because you set up choices doesn't mean those are actual choices. It doesn't mean they are legitimate choices. And it doesn't mean that picking those choices has a definite consequence on the future of your relationship with trees. This is sort of how it works for people too. A researcher named Amy Muse, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Muise, who's an assistant professor in the psychology department at York University and the director of the Share Lab, conducted some research to see if some of these core tenets of Chapman's love language ideas stood up under empirical scrutiny. What she and other researchers have found is that what makes a relationship have lasting satisfaction is the self-regulation of behaviors and the appropriate interactions people have with each other over the course of time. This makes the biggest difference. That might sound very obvious to you and me, but if you don't prove it empirically, how are you ever going to know? It might be better to think of acts of service, quality time, physical touch, words of affirmation, and receiving gifts the way Beth Rolls speaks of it. These are expressions of care. And while we can do these expressions of care, we don't necessarily have a lasting love with a person we do these things with. A doctor or a nurse could do these things for us. That doesn't mean we'll have a lasting marriage with somebody who's able to figure out some of the things that we like in terms of care. What the empirical studies also showed was that how the female in the relationship, these are heterosexual couples, over 1,000 couples who were part of the study, how the females felt in the relationship and how they felt their needs were met determined the overall satisfaction more than the males in the relationship. A lot of that has to do with feeling like the expectations of what we wanted were not met. Dashed hopes, hope deferred. So if we're wondering, why can't my partner give me the love with the love language I need? We should look a little more carefully to see what kind of self-care we can do to meet that need ourselves. Because if we rely on another person to give us something we need, we're going to be disappointed a lot. We can't rely on a person to satisfy every need, every internal need. A lot of times it's because that need comes from a wound, and that wound needs healing. It won't be healed by some external addition to our lives. It'll be healed from the inside out. The healing is an inside job. So maybe we should look a little more carefully at our interior world and see if it's acts of service. That might mean a lot to us because we felt overlooked. It's not a problem if our partner does acts of service for us that might make us feel cared for. But we shouldn't feel let down, like they're breaking a promise to us, when their acts of service aren't really meeting our needs. Quality time is the same thing. Quality time and physical touch and words of affirmation and receiving gifts often feel more special if they weren't really part of our childhood or our lives, or there's some kind of wound around them, or some kind of hurt feeling. People we loved maybe didn't give those things to us in ways that we needed it the most. Putting the burden of that healing on our partner, though, is too much for them to bear. It's an unfair request of them. It's an unfair burden for them to shoulder. And this is why we do our inner work. This is why we ask God to help us, and we ask for the ministry and healing of the Holy Spirit to heal those parts of us that don't feel loved. And that's the kind of supernatural healing that we need. It's only really the love of God that could actually heal and soothe those inner parts of us that feel so needy and want to be taken care of and cared for these specific ways, and are sort of grasping for more and more of that. You know I need physical touch. Why aren't you giving me what I need in my love language? We have to remember that these love languages, in large part, are kind of a bunch of baloney. There are ways we can love each other and care for each other, yes, but our relationships don't hinge on these 5 love languages. This was a great way for Gary Chapman to make money in a pop psychology way with something very catchy, and hopefully it helped a lot of people. I wonder, though, if it set a lot of people up thinking, well, acts of service is my love language. Wait a minute, I should feel happy, but I don't. Even though acts of service are being accomplished for me, it's not working. If you've been disappointed thinking the love languages would work for you, don't be. They were not empirically proven in the studies. Instead, let's think of our relationships as requiring a kind of a balanced diet. Ways we care for each other and care for ourselves in a whole variety of ways. Some are familiar ways and some are novel ways. And we can check in with each other to see what's helpful, but also know that we do not bear the responsibility of healing the internal wounds of our partner, and they do not bear the responsibility for us either. Sometimes myths like the 5 love languages and other fables like familiarity breeds contempt and happy wife, happy life both have been empirically disproven. These fables and myths take hold of our imagination, and they inform our lives even though they're actually untrue. They can set us up for disappointment. They can set us up for failure or over-scrutinizing. They can put false choices in our path, forcing us to choose what is an incomplete set of choices. And we can use our powers of discernment to realize it's never quite that simple. There aren't really love languages. There are ways of being and acting toward each other that build connection. And those include a myriad of ways. So it helps to communicate. It helps to ask, okay, you can tell me your 5 love languages. That's great. But what other things build connection? What other things are your favorite? What have I done in the past that has made you feel connected with me? Here are some things that you've done or said that have made me feel connected to you. Let's try these things together. Let's build on these things. So whether it's with your partner or friendships or even your coworkers, we can build things into our interactions and our relationships that build perhaps on the 5 love languages, but hopefully much, much more. I'm pretty curious to hear what you think. Have you encountered the 5 love languages? Do you remember top few languages were? I'm eager to hear what you might say about this episode. You can find more about this episode, the resources I use, the articles, the researchers, the authors, if you go to my Substack page, sparkmymuse.substack.com or sparkmymuse.com or lisadelay.com. Those will all get you to the same place to find this episode, SSL 308. I really appreciate that you join me each week for another episode, and until we meet again, I wish you blessing and peace.